Hey friends, how are we doing? And welcome to another Sunday live streaming. Obviously, a very happy Easter wishes to all of you, and I hope you're having a fantastic break if you're getting a few free days in and around the weekend, and of course enjoying your Sunday. So here we are back with another Sunday live stream. And today's topic is sound design. How did that topic kind of become the theme of today? During the week, I put out a couple of polls, both on Instagram, on my Instagram account, which is Heath Home by Music, by the way, my handle, and also here on YouTube, just asking my music producer community, that includes you guys and girls, what do you find, which stage of the music production process do you find the most challenging? Is it writing, music composition, sound design, structure and arrangement, or mixing? And it was a tie for structure and arrangement and sound design. So today's video's topic is going to cover sound design based on the results of that poll. Big thank you to RZooTube for commenting as well, and making a really valid comment that some of these stages of music production, be it mixing, arrangement, composition or sound design, they're all very linked. They all overlap with each other. And RZooTube's comment was very valid because, to be honest, obviously the better your music idea is at the start is, a lot of those pieces all naturally kind of flow into each other and you end up with a better result because of the idea that you had at the very start. So thank you for making that comment. Absolutely agree with you. A lot of these different stages of music production are just labels so that we can kind of identify where we are, but the truth is they all overlap and it all flows. So the result of one sort of flows into the next and then on to the next. So as you get better at doing this and more experienced, ideally each time you start a new idea, you can consider more factors to do with some of those stages that you will reach in the future. If somebody's already in the stream and they're listening to me speaking, if they can let me know if my microphone's fine, that would be amazing. I'll also, just as I'm asking this question, play just a little bit of a drum beat over here that I've got in this project. And again, if you can kind of let me know if those levels are okay, that would be great. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat if someone's there and they can kind of, as I said, just give us the heads up that both those things are working and the levels are fine. That would be amazing. Would appreciate it a lot. So I'll try not to speak too much at the start. There's quite a lot of talking in last week's, and get stuck in. Sound design, what is it? What is the goal of doing sound design? How is it going to help our music production, our projects? What are the benefits of that, of doing sound design? Well, I would point straight away to the fact that Xavi Diaz, micro good, beat good. Thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate that a lot. So when it comes to sound design, I think the way we can kind of frame it and think about it is it's one of the best ways that we can create music that has its own distinct sound, our signature sound, our distinctive sound. If we're sort of at the level that we're working with all this music and we're using presets that other people have programmed the synth to sound this way, and lots of loops and sounds that are already programmed to sound a certain way, we can manipulate and shape those into our own sounds. But obviously, if we develop our sound design skills, then we can really create our own distinctive sound and signature sound. So I think that's the pathway that learning about sound design and getting good at it opens up, more signature sounds, more distinctive sound, and your ability to break free from using, materials that is already quite, a certain sound already to start with. Yes, you can tweak those sounds and make them your own, but this is also a lot about learning how you can make things your own. So I think sound design is really an important thing to learn. Quick story about how I got into sound design. So I've created sample packs that have been sold on Loop Masters and Splice. And I think this is a good thing to share. Essentially, I used to do sessions inside of Ableton and the DAW where I would practice, you know, trying to make a synth sound or using some effects and trying to make a cool sound with it. And when I first started doing that, I didn't really have a plan of what I would do with the results of those sessions. And because I didn't feel like I was writing a track or I had a track idea in mind, I was just messing around and practicing, I kind of binned a lot of that work. And somewhere along the way with those practice sessions, I just suddenly realized this is really silly of me to be putting all this material in the bin after just practicing and coming up with some very cool sounds and things and not having an application for it, which was silly, and I'm sure you will agree. So I started to connect the practice sessions to making my very own sample packs to then use in my own projects. And that's how my own journey and story started with sound design. I started, you know, setting out on a mission to make a bunch of cool bass sounds or a synth bass preset or a favorite combination of audio effects that equals a certain result. And then over time I built up a lot of material, and I can pick the best ones that I make and save them for myself for my own music projects. And then I could also go through lots and lots of that practice material and end up creating full sample packs of different genres. And as I said, they end up potentially being released on Loop Masters or Splice. And so I got well into being a sound designer as well, not only for my own projects, but also to make parts for other people and their music. So if that helps, find a purpose for it. At least the minimum purpose would be that you're going to make things that you're going to use in your own music production workflow, your own signature sound, your own distinct sound. Fill up your user library. Think, today I'm going to make my sample pack, and these are going to be elements that I'm going to use in my own production workflow. That's what I think is the key with sound design. That also leads me to think, you know, we often do sound design inside of a project we're working on, but what I'd like to propose today is that you think about it as a separate stage, a separate day of the week perhaps, if you have that time, or dedicate a couple of hours a week that you just do sound design. Like, I'm a massive nerd, maybe I call it Sound Design Sunday or Weird Wednesdays, and I just dedicate some time where that's all I'm doing. And it can also be really valuable when you open up your Ableton Live or another DAW or whatever, and you don't really feel like doing music, or it's not flowing, you don't have a track idea and you're not working on a track, well then put your energy into doing some sound design. And if you walk away from that session, you opened up Ableton, you did music, and you saved an amazing bass preset, or you made a bunch of bass loops or drum loops that you can use in future projects, then fist bump to you guys and girls, because that's exactly kind of what we want to tie into all of this. So that's enough of me rambling away here. Welcome to the channel if you're new here. Welcome back if you're back visiting again this video. Today we're doing sound design. All right, so what have I got here inside of Ableton Live? I've got a little bit of a template, and that's another thing that I don't really use a lot in my typical music production workflow, but as this is a sound design workflow, I think, again, I'd like to propose that a template could be a really good idea, where you set up a special Ableton Live project that's got some things in it that you're going to use when you're kind of going to have fun and try and design some really cool new sounds and stuff. Like I said, sometimes we do end up doing that inside of our working track, but this is looking at it from the perspective that you're doing it beforehand or in a separate session. So I've got over here on the left hand side just some drum loops, and I've labeled them up with different titles. So if I'm wanting to do some musical type stuff, I could launch the breaks loop here, and it's going to give me a little bit of inspiration to go ahead and do some other work, or a tech house loop or Afro house, as you can see. So this is just a fast way to have like a groove and a drum beat of sorts going in the track, so I can kind of use that as inspiration. So I think, looking at all of this, let's start with a bit of a mission to make X. What is X going to be today? Well, let me try and show you a few ways, creative ways, because that's the other thing about the sound design. It's all about creativity and using your imagination and kind of channeling the weird. We're trying to come up with things here that might be unique to us and special to us, right? So I'm going to show you a few things, how we can use audio, which might be helpful to a lot of you that are working with sample packs and sounds, so you can turn them into your own, and maybe we'll also use some instruments as well. So I think I'm going to start with bass lines, come up with a couple of bass lines and show you some different techniques there. So literally what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to find a preset sound out of Ableton, so we can kind of go into instruments, and we can come up here and use, I'm in Ableton 12, if you're in 11 you won't have the same filters as me, but you can always go up to the search engine and then start searching things down. So I'm going to look for a bass sound. I do want a synthesizer here, and maybe I'll just look at what's come up in analog under bass. And I kind of know this 106 one at the top here. It's like based on a Juno 106. So what I'm going to do is just open up this MIDI track that says bass lines at the top and drag and drop that onto it. And literally I'm just going to try and come up with, and I think today I'm going to play this in. So what we might also do, just for those of you who would be interested in kind of seeing what the MIDI is that's going in here, let's kind of have a bit of a device on here that will show the notes I'm playing. So we'll stick that in and we can kind of turn off a bunch of the parts to it. All we really need is kind of what we see up here, and we can also turn off the scale guide so we're not in a certain scale at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to launch a drum beat. I didn't realize I was going to get the latency that I'm getting over OBS plus YouTube, so let's just see if I can get that a little bit tighter. If not, I'll just program the notes in, because yeah, that's a little bit quite a lot of latency for me at my end. So let's just see what happens there. We'll close that up. All right, let's try again. Yeah, it's not too comfortable, so I'm just going to change the setup on that. I'm literally just going to program in a bass line rather than play it on my MIDI keyboards. I'll look at fixing that for another stream. It's just a bit too behind the beat to be super comfortable on. So let's have a look at a few notes here. We could also use some of Ableton Live 12's tools here. And we might just have something super simple. Let's have a little bit of randomization on the velocity of all these notes. So we've got a little bit of a basic bass line here. Opted out of playing it in on the MIDI controller because there's a little bit too much latency on that side of things. So what I'm going to do is just grab that bass line clip and I'm going to move it over into the arrangement view so that we've got it over there to work on as well. So let's do that. Let's bring it in over here. And let's loop it up over here. And we've got the same bass line now, and if we push play, So what I want to do next is, as I said, I'm kind of showing you some techniques that you can use at home if you're working with Ableton Live and Ableton Live Studio, and that is working with some of these presets that we have. So we're going to, as I said, kind of make something unique here using something that everyone kind of has good access to. So what I want to do with this 106 Juno bass and this bass line pattern I've got now is I'm going to click on the bass line here and choose Command G to group it, which is going to put it in its own little instrument rack here at the moment. And then what I want to do is go back over to the browser in Ableton, and I'm going to again look at my filter here of instruments and bass. And so we've got all the different synths of Ableton here, and we've got all the different bass presets. And if we also want in 12 to narrow things down a little bit, if we click on one of these and we like the tone, we can always click there and then we can filter by that tone. So now all of these bass lines in the list here are going to be very close to that tone that I just liked. So what I'm going to do with these presets is I'm going to drag and drop the next one and drop it below the 106. Let's find another one. That's pretty cool. That's nice. Let's pop that in the same rack. Could be interesting. Let's have that in there. We don't have to go too crazy. Maybe one more. Yeah, that could be nice. So at the moment, we've now got this instrument rack full of all these different bass patches. And again, you can do that so many different ways. You can come back here and we could clear that filter and we could go up here and say instruments again and bass, and we could move around, right? I could have added wavetable basses as well as analog in this list here, where we've got all of these different patches now, or presets, whatever you want to call them. Now, something that's important is if I push play now on my MIDI clip, you're going to hear all of these basses at the same time, and that's not going to sound very nice. So I'm just going to click one of them and then hold down shift and select them all and turn them all off for a second. I'm not probably going to go into too fancy a mapping for today, but we could sort of do some mapping here and also make a macro knob that would switch between all of these different presets. But literally all we want to do is switch them on and off one at a time is what I'm going to be doing. So let's have a look now, and if we like, just so it's not confusing, let's name our instrument rack here the bass, I don't know, preset rack, let's say. And it's custom bass preset rack at the moment. Now we've got our MIDI clip up here. What I'd like to do next is create below it an audio track. And in this audio track below it, I'm going to have it listen to the bassline MIDI track with that rack on it. So in this audio track here, it's actually going to be recording in, let's say. So it's going to be listening to the bassline track. So we need to open up the ins and outs over here and say, listen to the bass lines. Great. We're going to arm that track. Okay. And so now let's turn on one of the presets here. Okay. Might look for another sound. That bottom one's a bit too... Got a couple of winners and a couple not so good. That's great. We're going to keep that. We're going to keep that one. That's not so good, so we'll just delete that out the rack. That can stay. That one can go out the rack. So in the end, we might actually end up going over here and doing kind of what I said. Let's have a look for perhaps something a little bit more obvious that's going to work from this list of presets. That will definitely work. Could be interesting. Let's have that donkey bass there as well. So now we'll start again with this idea. We'll have that bottom bass on like so. Great. So what we're going to do now, which is going to be the fun part, is we're going to kind of extend this loop over a little bit here, just so that we make sure we don't cut off the parts that we're going to be recording. And on this rec in track here, we're now going to right click on it over here, and we're going to ask it to show take lanes. Okay, so what that's going to do in a moment is it's going to show all the lanes of the recordings that are going to go in here. So we're going to start by recording the organ bass into this lane here. And let's keep it that we're doing just, how many bars have we got? Just 4. Maybe 4 is okay. We could make it 8 bars, but I think we'll work with 4. So now everything's kind of set up. Up the top here, I'm just going to click this plus on so that when I start doing any recording, I'm not going to override any of these MIDI notes that are already here. That's going to protect those. And then when I'm ready, I can hit the big record up the top here. And record in the first bass. And when it gets past the end of the MIDI here, we can hit record or stop, so that we don't overwrite that, and we've got our first bass in here, and you can see we've got a take lane with that bass in it. So now we're going to go over to the rack, and we're going to switch off that bass and switch on the next, and now we're going to do the same thing. Right, and then we're going to go through the next one, which is up the top here, and carry on. And I must point out as well, I'm doing bass lines here, but it doesn't have to be bass lines. So use your imagination. This could be pads, chords, synths, leads. It's up to you what your mission was to try and achieve here. In this case, I'm trying to come up with some kind of cool original sort of bass line using something that most of us have access to. That is a library of bass preset sounds in synths that we're not really doing anything to them other than choosing the ones we like, putting them in the rack, creating a bass pattern for it, and then recording them out. And you'll see where the fun starts in a little bit more. So let's carry on. We've got so far 3 of the basses recorded. And sometimes if you do what I just did, which was go all the way back to 1.1 up the top here, a couple of things you can do. You could always click in here and set a marker if you like, and just then click there, and that'll make sure that the recording will start just from near to where we're working, rather than going all the way back over here to somewhere where I'm not actually wanting to record stuff over there. So that was something to point out there. Just makes life a little bit easier. Cool. So let's have a look now. We've got a couple more to go. So who reckons they know what I'm going to do next? That would be an interesting question. If you know the answer to that, drop it in the chat if you're watching the stream. Let me know, what am I planning to do with all this? All right, so there we are. We've got a bunch of take lanes, and we've kind of, we can come in here and just kind of essentially clean off all these tails, or if we'd like those tails to be kept, we could perhaps just clean up from, say, somewhere like here. But I think as these are probably going to loop around, we can actually kind of trim all that off. Set our loop to loop here. Modulate between the timbres. Hi Synth Seeker. Not bad at all. Well, I'm about to reveal what I'm going to do, but that's a pretty good answer, to be honest, so well done. So we've got kind of all of those would work, right, on their own as a bass line. We had the MIDI pattern, and we've kind of recorded all the presets. But the cool thing about using take lanes and comping in these take lanes is what we can do now here in Ableton is turn on our pencil tool here. And at the moment, the top track up here is the last bass, the take of the full bass line down the bottom here that you can see. So what we can do is, and we can also resize these so we can see them a little bit better, make them a little bit bigger. What we can actually do is turn on our pencil tool, and we can kind of decide, well, actually I want that note from that bass line, and let's sort of draw right through it. And what we'll do is we'll do them one bar at a time, like listening and deciding which notes we're going to keep. Okay, just let me check something there. I think we're okay. So if we want to go a little further with this. Right, and that's kind of the concept here. So now we're building up the top here this master track, right, of a bass line that's unique because it's taking slices of the pattern from all those different presets to build, like, you could call it a Frankenstein bass. But I think it's quite unique and quite original. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a bass line. That's what I'm doing kind of here. And if you zoom in carefully, you'll notice that every one of these little segments, they're their own clips, right? What do I mean by that? So this little clip that I'm currently using up the top here, I could color it different, so we could kind of see that that was the orange track up here. But I can lower the volume of it, right? So you can see the hits getting lower. I'm going to restore that, but I can change the volume, and I can also change its pitch and do various things on just that particular slice, right? So we'll kind of look at that in a little bit if we need to do that, but all of this is kind of like able to be separated, right, from, you know, each independent part. And if there's any clicks or pops, you can zoom into these areas here, and all the volume fades are there on the edges of the clips, so you can kind of remove any clicks and pops by going in and crossfading. So here, where we've sort of moved two basses together, if we get any pops and clicks, we can do that. So I think I've got the first bar how I'd like it. Let's work on the next section. Okay, the last loop. All right, let's loop the whole thing up. See what we've got. Right, that's pretty cool. I mean, in my opinion, you know, that's just given us something really quite interesting here, using presets, as I said, that most of us can get our hands on, and using them in a unique way. That bass line that's living up here on this track right now doesn't exist anywhere else other than currently in this project. And if we kind of like, so we could close up the take lanes now, so we don't have to show them anymore. And we've got up here the top bass that's the combination of all those parts. And just to sort of expand on what I was saying about if there's any pops and clicks, you know, we can go in and sort of tidy that up. I think it's pretty good. I'm just going to listen carefully for a second just to hear. And where it gets a bit loud in places, so this hit here, I'm just going to lower the volume down a little bit. So I'm just going to bring that back, and you see the top of it up there, lowering down into the point where I'd like it to sit. Might do this one hit as well. Also this one, or this second bit here, which I can split if I want, so I can work on it just as a second piece. So that was Command E I used to do that little split there. And if we want to get sort of more sophisticated, so thinking this could be leads, drums, it could be whatever sort of sound you want to work on, you can also do some really funky kind of stuff here. So maybe just at the end of a phrase, let's say this one here, we could kind of take that little bass hit there, split it into its own clip, and again, if you want, you can always color them so you know that you're working just in that space only, and reverse it. So we'd get a little reverse bass note there as opposed to the same direction. Nice, right? So we might keep that. Again, we can smooth it out. And that's without any processing at the moment. By that I mean there's no effects added to it or anything like that. So we're doing sound design today. We can absolutely take this and develop it further. So I'm pretty happy with that clip. I'm going to, you know, draw through it like I've done with the mouse, and now do Command J, and I'm going to turn that into a bass clip, right? And now I've just created, you know, bass line number 1 here for today's session. And maybe it's finished and maybe it's not. As I said, it's still quite raw. It's just all those synth sounds in a bass loop now, let's say. And if you want to be super tidy over here, you can also go back to showing the take lanes if you're finished, and you can kind of remove these, right? So if you're worried that it's taking up too much computer resources, you can come through and remove these take lanes. And the little speaker button as well, you can kind of preview each take lane if you want to listen to it independently, right? But I've kind of finished what why I had those take lanes in the first place, as I've stitched them all together into my own custom bass loop, which I could now drag back over to the session view and pop it. Let's say we put it on that track, but let's make a new audio track over here and we'll stick it there, because this is kind of a track that was listening to, called record in, because it was listening to the work I was doing before. So I'm just going to make an audio track here, and that's going to have this bass line on it, as it's now in audio. Okay, bass lines, we might say. So now I can kind of go through my drum grooves that I had earlier. And also, just one thing to point out as well is that record in track is currently still, you can see here that when I push play, it's still active. That's because it's listening to this track, and also because if we pop over here, we know that that MIDI is active on that track. It's still there, that bass pattern. So I can either mute that bass pattern, or if I come back to the record in track, I can also just come here and say audio from no inputs. And now if we push play, you know, it's interesting. Okay, it's still playing the MIDI with all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to knock that off, as I said, and keep it kind of silent. And now we're going to be listening to this track, and we're not going to be listening to anything over here anymore. Right now we're listening to this bass line that I've made. And one thing we need to do as well with it is just turn looping on in the audio clip after consolidating it into one part. We could try out some different drum grooves. I think it fits this kind of genres. house. Cool, so what about processing? Well, over to the right here in this little template idea that I floated up earlier in the piece, that I think when you're doing sound design sessions, when we are kind of making parts for tracks and songs, but I'm not in a song at the moment working on it or composing or writing, I think you can have a template and you can have lots of your favorite tools and things to hand that you want to use in these sound design sessions, right? And so we built this little rack a moment ago to put all these bass presets in. Well, something else I quite like to do is build other racks containing different things, and some of those racks are my favorite audio effect racks. So what have I done here on this track that says audio effects? I've got all these little kind of groups of effects together grouped in a rack. So if we kind of look at them a little bit in detail, if we open up the rack a bit, we can see I've labeled this one groove, and I've kind of put a couple of favorite audio effects together in this rack that I like to use to add some groove to something. Then I've done one for pitch, then I've done one for saturation, and literally all we're doing, let's build one of these from scratch. Let's say we're doing something like, yeah, let's say we want to color this bass line sound that we've made here. So we go over to Ableton, we head to the audio effects, and we're looking for the typical effects that we might like to add to our bass line and sort of give it a bit of grit and color. If you do what I've done here, all I would need to do is pick that particular rack from here. I'd like the saturation rack, and I can actually just hold my option key down on a Mac or Alt on Windows and drag and drop it over here, and now there's a copy of that there, right? And if you really want to take this further, you can actually put all of this in a bigger rack. So let's maybe just duplicate this track twice so I can kind of show you, and then it's together in both parts. So let's give this another color. And this one I'm going to turn into a mega rack. So I'm just going to shift and select all of the things together, Command G, and I've now got a giant instrument rack, and I can drag that instrument rack and pop it over here, and essentially the first rack that I'd moved there, I've now got all of the different individual racks. I've got a global power button. If I turn that off, nothing is going to be active. If I turn that on, the way I've set this up is all these individual racks, they're also switched on, but the actual effects are not switched on, so there's no CPU action happening here. Synth Seeker, you could blend their timbres a touch with some delay perhaps. Excellent suggestion. I think we're going to do that, and love the reverse. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, as I said, like when you're getting creative and having fun doing this, there are no limitations, right? It's either going to sound good or not good, crappy or good, and we keep it and move on, or we start again and look for something else, right? So I haven't shown you how I built these individual racks, but we've now got this big rack over here on that bassline track, and we could switch on or off whatever we think could be useful here that we might like to apply to this bassline. Let me just show you how to build one of these racks. So again, here's all the audio effects over here, and let's say we'd like to use the amplifier. Let's say we would like to have, what else might we have? We might have, I was almost going to grab the drum bus, great effect, but let's just say, as I said, I'm looking for a little bit of maybe crunch and color, throw an overdrive there. What else could we have? Raw would be amazing. That's a Live 12 device that does pretty much what I'm kind of looking for here. That would be enough just to show you a demonstration. So let's say these are 3 effects I'd like to have in my sound design template, or favorites for coloring sounds. Pop them all on a track, shift and select all of them, and then group them in your own little rack. Open up the macro tab here, the show and hide of the macro tab. Where it says audio effect rack, you can right click and choose rename, or you can use Command R or Control R on Windows, and here we can then say, like fat rack or whatever we want to call it, and now we've just built our very own little cool effect rack, right? And again, if you want to follow my lead, we can switch all those individual effects off so they're not doing anything at the moment, and we can turn the rack off as well if we like, but when we're ready we can switch on what we want. And also I'll often reorder these, right? So depending on the signal flow, what I want to affect which and how, I'll drag these around and reorder them a lot, right? So that's kind of what was going on over here. I made all these little bunches of individual little racks with favorite effects, popping them in there. They're all just Ableton ones here as well. Added a few extras here. These are sort of for cleanup duties and professional kind of polishing up the sound perhaps at the end. So hopefully that kind of explains that. What's going on over there. We can now sort of, well, we can leave that all over there, doesn't hurt anything. So back over here, I've now got my bass and I've actually got the mega rack, and maybe we should call that, let's say this is the, because it kind of is now, click there, Command R, let's call it the mega rack. All right, I've got several of those, and you can also add third-party effects in here. It doesn't only have to be Ableton, but I'm trying to keep it friendly for you guys and girls out there that kind of want to just starting out and you're only using Ableton at this point in time. Just gonna have a sip of my tea. Happy Easter, by the way. I hope you've had a great break and you're enjoying your Sunday. And if you're here with me in this stream, well, thank you for joining me. Sunday's Easter Sunday for me. Great day to be doing some beats or making some music. If you're new here to the channel, well, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. If you are enjoying the content on here, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. Appreciate it and is much appreciated. Let's crack on here. So now we can play this bass line. And we might kind of, Synth Seeker put a little tip in the chat here about possibly using a bit of delay. So this bass line, we could add a bit of delay. So if I look at my racks down the bottom here, I've got a spatial rack over here, and in there are some of my favorite delays. So let's maybe switch on the echo inside of there on the bass line track and have a listen to that. And then we can adjust it to our taste. So we might not want a lot of stereo, so we might make it a mono echo over there. We might have a higher feedback. Bring the dry wet down and then just drop that in a little bit. Maybe have it really subtle. And we might visit the modulation tab in the echo and add a little bit of wobble to this kind of delay, so it's a bit unique. And we might just add the wobble, like the LFO modulation, to the delay itself, the time. Right, and we've got all sorts of possibilities here. We could go for unsynced delays. Something quite wonky like that. And this gives me some great ideas for resampling, which is another part of sound design, where maybe we play around with this delay time now and re-record this bass line with this, playing around with this. Right, we could record the results of what I'm doing there and create some really pretty wild parts for our track. But let's just keep it to a nice kind of interesting bass line for now. Quite like that. Switch the echo off so we can kind of hear what that's done. In this same rack, we could have a little bit of chorus. Nice. Really thickens it up. We can feel the stereo that's come from that chorus, so we want to maybe watch out for that a little bit, that we don't get too carried away. And if you've got something like a little bit of an imager plugin, in my previous mixing stream I kind of shared the links to this, but iZotope do a very, very handy little tool, the Ozone Imager. It's still free. I think it costs you an email sign up with iZotope, and if we drop this here we can kind of see a little bit of what we're doing to the bass line with that chorus. And yeah, that's a lot of chorus, so I bring the dry wet down so it's more controlled than it was. And I could hear that. I don't really want to make a big stereo kind of bass line. I want to keep it kind of quite mono, but a bit of chorus is nice. And again, we can kind of change it a little bit as well. We could make it I'm looking for up here a little bit. Yeah, that's okay for now. And this is the thing about sound design, right? It's kind of like, you know, having fun here. We've taken a concept and we've come up with, I think, one quite tasty bass line here. You know, so let's maybe keep working on this a bit. I'm just going to add maybe a little bit more sound processing here. So we've got a bit of chorus, we've got an echo going on. I think that sounds good. We've kind of checked to make sure it's not getting too wild on the stereo side of things. The chorus is the main thing that's really creating more stereo width, and I like to keep my basses personally in the music I write not too wide. I'll also just check the echo on its own. So the echo also, and if that it's fairly controlled. Some of those two together, yeah, it's working. It's just on the edge of being almost too much, but it's about right for now. So over here in my little mini rack, Sintsika baking a ham and watching you, that sounds awesome. I kind of give that for sure a heart. Sounds good. Well, thank you for watching, and hope you're finding some useful things here to take away in your own music production. All right, so let's have a look over to the left here. We've got some other candidates that we could add before some of these kind of effects that kind of give it a bit more thickness, the echo, and a bit more vibe. We could also add over here in this mega rack, we could use some saturation perhaps. So let's maybe switch off the spatial rack and just do a little bit of potential saturation, a little bit of nice character, and then we'll turn that back on. That's the amp. Bit of saturator or raw, which I think if you're lucky enough to be using 12, I would be going down the raw road. Yeah, because that sounds really nice with a bit of raw. And try out some of the other raw engines. Now, if we want really nasty, oof. Yeah, that's cool. Why not keep that? Let's turn back on our spatial rack. And we can drag it over a little bit over. Maybe we'll drag all of these to the start of the grouping of these different effects. So a little bit less echo is what my ears are telling me. We also might have the groove rack involved on this bass line as well, and we might add the groove rack at the very start because, like I said, don't be afraid to move these effects around, have the chorus play after the echo or the raw after the chorus, and listen to the results, and you decide yourself. Is there a rule book that says the chorus should go before the echo? Well, that's probably the right answer, but there is absolutely no rule book. And I can tell you for starters that on the saturation little rack, the raw, that can go after the spatial, and it will work and it will sound quite different. So if we put it there, it's now saturating after the chorus and the echo versus before it was happening before them, right? So try all that out and decide what works best for your ears. I like it before, that's the traditional path. But if you put it after, it can also work, right? Let's have the beat repeat from the groove tool and see if we can juggle up the groove a little bit of the bass line. There we go. Right, so we might want to, as wild as that. But now we're juggling up the notes a bit in the groove, so we could decide to do that. And again, we get a very low chance that that happens. Make it only happen every bar, not every half a bar, or every 2 bars. Cool. Just for a little bit of extra flavor. So what that's doing is juggling up some of these notes. They're getting little repeats every now and then in every 2 bars, which is kind of like in this section here, there's a repeat, and then in this section, a repeat of some kind. And if we want, we can make variations of the repeats so they're not the same each time around. Shorter note lengths, the repeats. Now it'll be the 16th repeat. I like quarter, sounds quite cool. All right. Just going to back off raw slightly. It sounds really good, but just not as dominant. I do like it a lot. So there we go, we've banked ourselves one bass line, right? And if we wish, if we were going ahead here and making a sample pack, what we would now do is we would kind of like bring this bass line with all of its parts. So what we can do is we can kind of bring that over to the arrangement view, pop it up on its matching track. We don't need to see that. There it is with all of its effects placed on the bottom of it, and we might go ahead and say, okay, let's now render that into an actual loop and put it in a folder. I mean, we could record it. That's another option we could do. We could record the result of this track, or we could actually, thinking about it, in Ableton 12 that I'm working in here today, if you're the same as me, if I duplicate this track just so we've got a copy of it, so Command D to pop it down here, I can actually go up to the top one here and I can right click it, and we can now in Ableton Live 12 freeze and flatten directly. And if I do that on the top track up there, I've now rendered that into a loop, and that's job done. If we open up that track, we'll see there are no effects there anymore. It's done, it's printed, and there is our bass line. But what I would tend to do myself is, that's kind of fine, but let's say we're building a sample pack, I would actually kind of loop this up now like it is. And I would duplicate the loop and loop it here just to check if there's any clicks or pops. If it loops okay. And if there's any sort of tiny things there, you can just kind of smooth that out a little bit. Make sure there isn't any funny business going on there, because if you are making professional loops for sample packs, they want what's called 0 crossing points at the start and end of your loops, that when you do loop it, there is no clicks and nasty sounds. So I'm kind of used to checking that and being in the habit of doing that. So what I'm actually going to do is just highlight the front where I've got that tiny little fade going on, and I'm going to hold down my Option key and drag it over and make it the front here. So now that loop there's served its purpose, and here we have everything we need. Let's loop that up, and then I would Command J just to join that all together. That's job done. And then I would do Command Shift R, or if you prefer, you can go up to File, Export Audio Video, and then we go down here and we choose bass lines, and we have a look at what it's telling us it's going to do. I'm pretty happy with all that instructions. Export. Where do I want it to go? What is it? So let's say it's baseline 1. And you can also do things like add in here the current tempo. We're at 26 BPM, so you know that. And also a scale if you're working in a certain music scale. I believe we're in A minor. That's what the notes I was playing, so you can also put A minor, just so that if you're making your own samples and sample packs and loops for projects, the next time you go and use this, you can drop it in, and you will have the sort of right information in there that you need. So let's call it live stream baseline as well, so we kind of even have more ID, and then drop it into the download folder. Easy as that. And if I jump over to that on my computer, grab it, I can now drag that into a folder, and then the next time I'm working, I have, let me make a new audio track. In my own little sample pack, a bass line that I can drag in and drop, and there it is. The results of what we've been doing so far. Pretty cool, right? So welcome to the world of making your own kind of samples and you doing a sound design session with a real purpose to come up with something that you can use in your own music and own workflow that nobody else has on their computer. And we've used Ableton audio effects, Ableton instruments, Ableton presets. We've not been lazy, but we've used things and recycled, repurposed, resampled, replayed it, repitched it, and that's a lot about what sound design can be. And we've come up with something distinctive, unique. I don't like the word original. I think distinctive's a lot better because there's a lot of weight behind trying to make something original. This is definitely something that doesn't exist anywhere else other than today in this session, right? Which is pretty cool, I think. All right, so let's do a little bit of tidying up here, and then let's do something else. So I've exported that baseline, so I'm happy to know that I won't lose that. So it's a real piece that I can now come back to and use in an actual project. So what else did I plan on showing? Let's move on to something else. What's another way, perhaps with bass lines? Well, I think that's a good example, using take lanes, making a pattern. The whole same process we could do with a lead synth or something like that. So perhaps if you'd like to see that, maybe drop a comment in the chat and we'll do something else with a different instrument, right? Let's maybe get rid of a couple of tracks that we're not using here, tidy it up, as I said, a little bit. That fat rack we don't need, that was just a demo. Great. We've got the mega rack over here, and it's also on that track there, but it's not grouped as a mega rack, that's fine. Okay, so what else have I got over here, a bit to the right hand side, carrying on with sound design and looking at ideas. I'm just gonna pop over here and just check what things look like over here. Yeah, that's all okay. I'll just mute those two tracks so we don't hear them. All right, so I've got another track over here. Another thing you can be doing as well, like generally when I'm making sample packs, either for myself or for commercial release, I am thinking about kind of that they'll all play together and be part of a track. So if you are interested in doing it and you're thinking to do that, then yes, you do try to sort of obviously make parts that will all work together. So a pad that could go with this bass line and a drum groove that could go with it at the same tempo, maybe the same scale of music, and that's something you do. Here we're just having fun with sound designing, we're making parts that we can use in projects. But like I said, if you are interested in that and you get into it, then you do tend to want to start like making the parts so that somebody else could buy your sample pack and grab the bass loop and the pad loop and the synth loop and put it together and come up with a music idea. So right now we've got our bass line so far. I'm going to switch all that off, and I'm actually going to, what I will do actually is put a new audio track in, and I will grab that actual loop that I exported and pop that in there. That is the result. of this work here, and then we can switch all that off. We might come back and use some of those things, but this is the loop that I created, exported. Got our inspiration loops over here for the moment with some different genres of drums. You can hear this bass could cross over quite a lot. You can decide which genre you think it works best for, but I deliberately tried to create a bass that I think is quite flexible in how many different genres it could fit with, really. Perhaps techno could be a little bit of a quicker kind of bass, I think. But this sounds cool. All right, so what have we got over to the right? And I'm just going to drag that over to there. That was all the creation of that, but this is the actual export that I exported out, the final product, effects, processing, everything done, and we've got ourselves a very cool little bass line. Right, over here, I've got another track in my template here, and it says Rand D-Rack. So what is this all about? Well, this particular track is like another technique where we can take something from Ableton Live and kind of turn it into something brand new, right? Again, trying to show you some clever ways here that we don't need fancy third-party plugins, or if you're a suite owner, you're going to have access to, right? So I'll make a new MIDI track next door, and obviously I won't just start by saying everything's done here and happy days and make a sound. I'm going to walk you through it. So on this track here, what we kind of want to do is find a drum rack perhaps, and obviously you can mark out favorite drum racks if you spend a little bit of time going through all the different drum racks that come with Ableton. Like these are all the ones I have that come with the suite, plus all the little packs that you can download. There's, you know, many drum racks there, so good idea at some point is to go through, find some favorite ones, and obviously bookmark them somewhere so that you can return. Seems the last one I was on was this one, Circle of Truth, so why not, we'll use that. And I'm just going to drag and drop that onto this blank MIDI track. So we've got a drum rack over here, but are we going to use it in a conventional way? Not really. We're doing sound design, so we're going to have a bit of fun with it. I'm not going to write a MIDI pattern or play in the drums. I'm going to come up with something that's going to generate something interesting for us. So if I look at my example one, again, it's got a little bit of a mini rack over here and a few pieces in between it. Here was the drum rack, by the way, that was on the example track, and then there's some audio effects afterwards. So always in the workflow, MIDI before the instrument, audio afterwards, so you can kind of, if you're looking at something like this, figure out what's going on. All of this left-hand side before the drum rack are going to be changing the MIDI into the drum rack, and all of these things on the other side are going to be processing the signal after the drum rack, working on the audio that comes out of the drum rack. So let's start with the MIDI rack that I've got set up over here, and let's kind of build that rack back over on our new drum rack. So what we need to do is we need to jump into the MIDI effects for a second, and we would like to have an arpeggiator. I'm going to drop that there. We'd like to have perhaps a random device as well from the MIDI effects, and maybe a velocity device as well. And then literally again, 3 MIDI effects, shift select them all, Command G, pop them in our own little rack. And this is going to be our, what are we going to call this one today? Rolling the dice. All right, so we've got a cool little rack set up here. Again, if we switch all these things off, nothing's happening until we're ready for them, and we could reorder these a little bit similar to what you just saw with the audio effects. When you're doing sound design type things, your creativity and imagination, you might come up with something that I have never thought of, or nor is somebody else. There isn't rules if you put something before something else, etc. So that's the first little rack. So let's maybe work our way through that rack. Just wanted to check that I've given you the same workflow that I had. What I do need to do is create a MIDI clip on this track. And in this MIDI clip, what we want to do is, because we're using the arpeggiator, we want to create some, essentially like a chord for a piano or a synth or something like that, but we want to make like a bunch of these samples trigger and then be rearranged by the arpeggio. So don't panic, I'll walk you through what's going to happen and we'll be able to see what's going on, but we need to create some more than, for example, a pattern like we're typically used to doing here where we might be just writing drums. We're going to do something a bit more than that. By the way, just wanted to let you know, if you're enjoying the content on the channel, please do like, comment and subscribe. If you've got any questions as we're going along, do drop them in the chat. Say hello. We already know that Synth Seeker's baking his ham. Same to you, Synth Seeker. Sorry, I didn't see that at ham time. Have a good Easter. Very much the same to you, and thank you for joining the stream. And if you're new here, well, welcome to the channel and welcome back if you're returning. All right, so let's plug in a bunch of notes that are going to trigger all of these sounds in the rack here. And we can do all of them if you like, or a whole bunch. Let's say an octave. What have we got? So there should be 16 samples in there, 15, 14, 13. So that would be an octave there. That would be 12, which should be enough. And then we're just going to highlight all of those. And before we do the next step, actually, I'm going to make this longer. It's only a bar. So let's say we have 4 bars worth of material here. Then we can select all the notes and we're just going to click legato. Well, we want that legato to have gone all the way there, but we can always do it manually. So drag those out. So now it kind of looks a bit weird for the moment, but we're essentially creating a bunch of like notes of all those samples that the arpeggio can kind of like grab all these different samples and then start to arpeggiate them. So let's have a look what's going to take place just with that. Let's turn on the arpeggio and let's kind of leave it in its default state for a moment, and let's hit play, and we'll knock off the bass line for a second and we'll have a listen to what we've got going on here. We might even knock off the brakes for a second. And if we look here, down where my mouse is on the pads, you can see what the arpeggio is doing, right? It's currently playing through those kind of samples, but you can see it's kind of repeating the same order, right? Exactly each time it goes around, it's going up through the notes. It's going up through these, just playing up like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to number 12. So that's not, it's interesting, but it's not super interesting yet. If we go over to the arpeggio though, and we change steps to allow it to reach up to another octave, we should see it reach these samples it's not currently touching, which are the ones that I didn't put a note here for. So it's not currently playing those. Let's see what happens when we introduce one step. And what's cool as well is it actually goes outside of those pads where there's no sounds. What's nice about that, we get rests in our drum beat and our groove, whatever we're creating here. We're going to get, actually it's going to create for us little rests between the notes, but we've still got this sort of boring climbing through up. So let's do something about that. Let's go to the arpeggio and say, let's have completely random. Nice. So if we give it more steps, we're going to get more rest or more space between the hits, because it's going to climb even further away. That was actually cool what it just did a second ago. And then if we want, we can change our rate of our arpeggio. So let's say we speed up to 16th notes. Let's go down 1. That's starting to get interesting, right? And if we want, we've got this kind of MIDI rack over here that I added a few other parts to it. Within the arpeggio itself, we can change our rate here. And if you're kind of, using your creativity here, you can always add LFOs and automation for these things to change as well. So look, sometimes when we look at some of these things, it's just the tip of the iceberg, how far you could go. What the random might do is if we use that as well, it would be kind of another way to add more chaos, let's say, to what's happening with the selection of the samples. And so if we turn the steps down here and we go back to, let's say up for a second. So we get this very repetitive pattern again, which is nice, but no rest, no playing outside of the pads, and not too much variation. If we add random and we say 12 choices is good because it's an octave and it's the number of MIDI notes that I have in this clip is actually 12 choices, so that correlates to that. And then chance, you can see again, now it starts to go outside of the pad sometimes. So it's adding some randomization. So instead of the octave steps of the ARP, I'm using the random to add some of that chaos. And if I want, I can now go and change my arpeggio style to something else. Let's try maybe diverge. And if you use the random in conjunction with random here and some steps, you're going to get a lot more chaos, right? You're actually asking it to really do a lot more randomization, right? And it kind of sounds like that. Maybe that's something you're looking for. Maybe you want a little bit more controlled than that. So we kind of dial this back a bit, kind of like what was happening a second ago. Like that. So I'm back with diverge, steps down, and a bit of randomization to give myself some interest here to the groove, right? And finally, we've got velocity here in the same rack, and then you can actually use the ARP again to do some velocity variations, but we could also put, velocity at the start here and get it to randomize the velocity of the notes as they come into the arpeggiator and then the random. So let's pick a range between the hardest notes and the softest. So if you want them really soft, you can have that range very small. Nice. Probably want a different bass line for that. I would go for sort of something, you know, this is sounding really like a nice kind of organic kind of loop. So maybe over here we would have just this a different kind of bass line to the one I created earlier, which is fine. And none of those presets would be what I'd use, so I'll make a bass line to go with this in a second, but obviously that was set up for the previous sound design. But I really like this like kind of percussion sound that's coming out of here, and I'd want to create a new bass line to go with it to make this particular part. And that's what I was saying before a little bit about making your own sample packs. At the moment, this is kind of perhaps not the best combination of 3 tracks, so that bass line I'd work on other loops to go with it, but both of these are keepers, but they kind of have, for me, 2 different kind of track ideas, which is nothing wrong with that, but at the moment I don't have a workflow where this matches that bass line, and therefore there's a little sort of like 1 track idea starting to bubble. But here I am sound designing parts that I can use in this track, in that track, so it's absolutely fine at the same time, right? And an example that I'm walking you through different ways to do things without necessarily connecting it all to the same particular song. I hope that makes sense. All right, so again, say hello if you're here in the stream. Do give us a hello in the chat and let us know where you're listening from. I hope you're enjoying the stream, and yeah, welcome back if you're returning, and hi if you're new here. All right, so just to point out with the drum rack track, with the arpeggiator. We're using all those parts now. If we want, if there's anything in here, this drum rack's quite nice because it's got all sorts of vintage sounds, but if there's any pads in here that, for example, let's solo it, you know, that is too low, or there's lots of kicks or things like that that you don't want, maybe there's boom down here, then you can just mute that pad, right? And it's not going to contribute to the groove. So you can decide what stays and what comes out, you know, and I particularly do that if I've got a drum rack here that has a load of sort of sounds in here that, you know, as I said, are too low, and I don't want them to contribute to the overall loop. That sounds quite nice now, and it wouldn't get in the way of a bass or the drums. And we can unfold these one at a time. Because there's still quite a lot of bass in there somewhere, in some of these loops. But it's nice, so it's actually kind of really cool. All right, so again, what I might do with this would be further processing. Let's just also just play a little bit more with the rhythm for a second with the arpeggio. Yeah, maybe have it a bit more like only eighth notes. And then after here, I'm probably going to steal it from my previous track, the Mega Effects rack, drop that behind here. And I'm going to, wherever I've used one previously, I'm just going to reset those to a new instance so we don't have anything from the previous. So that's reset that back, great. So raw is done. What else did I have? Chorus. That's okay, I can adjust that manually. I'll just drop the dry wet down if we use that, and the same with the echo. I will reset that to a new one, so it makes sense. There we go. All right, so anything left switched on in there? No. So now on this particular rack, again, I might sort of, the beat repeat is on, so I'm going to turn that off. We've got more than enough randomization of the groove here for me. I don't think I'd be using the groove rack. We could have a bit of raw if we want a little bit of character. We could also add a little bit of reverb, might be nice this time. Okay, that's kind of nice. Nice little bit of delay. And then over here, we could add as well a little bit of movement here on this loop. It kind of something that could sound quite nice with a bit of slow kind of wobble. So we're now kind of wobbling the pitch a little bit with vibrato. If we want to do that from this device, kind of set vibrato already. If we want to do that from scratch, we can come over to our chorus, switch it on here, switch it to vibrato, and then essentially what we're looking at is it'll sound quite wild, right? Because the LFO is in its default is quite fast rate and amount. So if we slow the rate down, we now get this little bit of like sort of wonky kind of tape feel. So let's turn it on and off. It's quite subtle. So you can hear, now it gets very wonky, right? So something like that, it's quite nice, gives it a little bit of feeling, and a little bit of flow. I would have that before the echo and the reverb. That again is a conscious decision where I've placed that. And also we might have a little bit of panning. Yeah, I need to bring this down a bit. It's a bit too much for my taste. Cool. So similar to that, and also maybe with this one, I'd take a little look over here at the EQ at the very end of the chain here. And already low cut it a little bit, just so it will sit in the future a bit nicer with drums and bass. Cool, somewhere like that. And I don't think I need to use anything else that was at the end of the chain there. And now, similar to what I did with the bass line, I would now potentially take this over to the arrangement view, pop it into our loop here, and in this case we can do a duplicate again just to protect the original track, and we can go and jump on here and do a freeze flatten and print that all down into a loop. But I think actually, given that this is quite a random kind of process, right, I think what I would personally do with that, rather than that, I mean, it's done what I asked it to do, but when I play that back, and also what I would do, I could turn it up, so I'll do that, but I can also have set myself to 0 before I started the recording, so I'll just pop in here. So we've got a really nice kind of cool percussion loop, but just to show you another way to go about that, because that perhaps wasn't the best way, I think, maybe to do this. I think a better way would actually be to, so I'm going to delete that, that's why it's always a good idea to duplicate, set the volume to 0 over here, so it's coming out at maximum loudness. I don't think we have any clipping, let's just have a check in the session view. All looks pretty good on the levels, so we don't have any issues there. We'll still end up turning it up. So let's come over here now, and in this case what I would do is come back a little bit to like what I did with the bass line. I'm going to open up an audio track. I'm going to get it to listen to this particular track, and I'm going to record this because there's a fair bit of randomization going on, right? So what we might like to do is give ourselves the choice of listening back and choosing a favorite loop rather than, you know, freeze and flatten, which doesn't really give us that option. So we could say, give me, you know, this amount of bars, 32 bars worth of a recording, and then I can go through there and pick out my favorite part. So let's do that. Let's record this. We can click here where we've already set that up, make life a bit easier. And often when you're listening out to this, you might hear the exact section that you love in the recording, and then you can go ahead and use that. Don't be shy. If you have any questions, do drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. Give myself a little bit of runoff space at the end here. Right, and then we don't need that track anymore essentially, and you can switch off everything in here to not consume all that CPU. We can always switch it back on if for some reason we need it, but we've now got that all nicely in audio, and what we can then do is jump inside that clip, loop it up, bring up the volume. Obviously we don't want to clip it, so watch out for any of your lower peaks and higher peaks, that they're not going over the threshold or the ceiling there. So I almost pushed it too far. Let's go back a little bit. But there's no issues really in turning it up. And then what I do now is I've got 30 odd bars there to play around with. Is I would now come in here and start working with, let's just bring it all the way out. Start working in sort of sections and listening back to that and sort of saying, is that the four bar loop that I want to sort of use, or 8 bar loop, or one thing we just want to be careful of is that we don't need the inputs anymore, so let's switch that off so we don't get a double up of any signals. I won't spend too much time on this, but I think you get the idea. I would then choose my favorite section from here and go about, again, looping it, selecting it, and rendering it out and exporting it so that I have, just like my bass loop, my very own now, really cool percussion loop. So let me just settle on part of it, and then I'll bring it back over to the arrangement as it is, and we'll try and do something else. I think all of that, to be honest, is pretty cool. Let's try a bit of Afro House. So again, it's pretty flexible. It seems to go with quite a lot of different genres there, which is great. So I'm going to call this kind of like Perc loop. Let's try it again with the bass that I had from before. Yeah, they're not really a fit, but that's fine. As I said, I'm trying to sort of show you here how you can use some of these techniques to kind of come up with sound design parts. But let's say that both these I will use, but I will use them in different styles of tracks. As I said, I would go about making another bass line that fits nicely with that particular loop. So what else have we got over here? So with that rack that I used, I kind of had one other technique inside of here that I haven't sort of shown, an alternative to the arpeggio, and we'll get kind of a little bit of a different result. So let's say we've got the same drum rack for a moment, and we've got our arpeggio rack over here. We're going to switch that off, and we're going to grab a sequencer and use that as an alternative. So I quite like this sequencer ML185. See where we can find it. All right, let's maybe just say 185, see if that helps. Or we'll go if all that fails, we'll grab it from, okay, maybe it's a dash, ML dash. So I'm just going to take it from this track here, my template track that I had, and I'm going to drop a copy of it onto here, and it's going to sit, instead of the arpeggio, it's going to sit in front of the drum rack, and then after that is the mega rack with the processing, right? So it's an alternative way to kind of come up with, again, a random sequence. So if you have some sequences that you like to use, this one is a Max for Live device that's free. I can link it in the description below. I believe I've linked it before. It's definitely a favorite of mine, and as I said, it's available in the Max for Live community, and you can download it for free. So if we switch that on, we've got the same drum kit. We're not going to use the MIDI clip for a second up here. Let's just move the mixer down a little bit. Let's just hit play. Maybe we'll move away from the Afro house groove so we don't kind of hear similar sound. And now that the sequencer's on, I'm just going to start randomizing the different steps of the sequencer. We do that over here with this little random button. And you'll start to see here that it's going through a bunch of the different pitches, right, over here, in a different way to the arpeggio, which was taking all of those MIDI notes that were connected to the samples and then replaying those in different patterns, the arpeggio patterns. This sequencer is simply repitching 8 steps in different pitches. So as we randomize this, it will randomize which steps or which pads it plays, which samples. So if you're making techno, this could be a really interesting way to do the same thing, but with more of a techno sound. So if I go to my techno drum loop and I speed up the groove here, and now I come to the sequencer, and I'm going to try changing the length of how many steps. It's 8 at the moment. Right, let's randomize it, keep rolling the dice a bit. I'm going to use the second page of the sequencer, the velocity page, and now randomize that. So each of the individual that's kind of cool. Let's try and see if we've got another sequence in us. Again, probably needs another bass line for this idea, but as you can hear, we've now got a much more kind of techno sort of sequence happening here. And again, creativity, imagination. Let's flip this drum rack. So we could flip the sounds on the pads, but let's actually flip the whole rack. So let's find another drum rack. So let's hit the hot swap. Let me take myself to, I'm probably just going to clear that for a second. That would be better. And now I'm here with some drum racks that I've bookmarked over the years, ones that I liked, and I'm just going to swap out the whole kit. So let's see what we get. Quite nice. Let's go for something else though. Let's keep going to find something interesting. interesting. There we go. And if we want to save this sequence and then try and make others, we should be doing something about that as well. So if we open up a MIDI track next door to what we're doing here, and we ask it to listen to the MIDI from this track, and we set it to in and record, let's just check. Right? Here's the sequence of the MIDI notes that are happening inside that sequencer. So if you're wanting to roll the dice again, this would be a great decision to make to safeguard that pattern, right? So now I've got 8 bars of the pattern there, and I can safeguard that, hit the stop button over here, and I can put that down on this track, lower down, it's just switched off, and now I can come back to here and I can roll the dice on the sequencer, on the pitch. And if I don't like those later, I can switch that off and I can come back and play the MIDI clip, and it's going to take me right back to where I was with my preferred sequence earlier. So do think about things like that, because they're going to make your life a lot more easier, and you're not going to lose ideas that you obviously don't want to lose. So we can also, in the sequencer, change down here in this little white box the rate. So if we go to 8th notes, we can slow this sequence down. But for techno, I think it was in a good place at 16th, sorry. We can adjust the overall pitch, so lots and lots of cool possibilities over there. All right, well, looking at the clock for today, and it's Easter Sunday, I think I'm going to wrap things up there at this point. Obviously, I'm going to do some more sound design streams in the future and continue to unlock, what is sound design and how can we use it. And if you sort of jumped into the stream later, sort of around this time, and you missed the beginning, do watch that back, because I explained there kind of like that, we can do sound design sessions like this separate to projects and create our own loops and synths and patches and devices and save them all up and then use them for our music projects, right? So dedicating a separate few hours a week or a particular day where you're not trying to do a track or a song, you're trying to come up with sound design and learning your instruments and effects and making your own sample pack, perhaps. It's a very, very powerful tool. We all do sound design inside of projects while we're working, but obviously this is, if you were doing this level of detail in the middle of a track that you're working on, you probably have lost a bunch of other ideas that you wanted to get on with because you went down a rabbit hole and disappeared right down into the very bottom. And so, this is a great way to practice, learn your instruments, software, audio effects, and save all that work in all the glorious ways that are possible. Make yourself audio loops and make your own sample pack, or save these devices into racks and into your library, or have a template like this where you save the project and all these devices and ideas save in there, and then you can just generate your own content. And everything I've done today, this ML8185 sequencer is Max for Live. As I said, it's still Ableton. Everything I've done today, if you're working in Suite 11, 12, 10, you'll have these instruments, you'll have presets that you can load up in a rack and work with, like this, drum racks. Arpeggios, and come up with some very cool parts that they only exist in this current session or your session, and that's how you get your distinct signature sound. So guys and girls, it's been a pleasure I wish you a great rest of your Easter break. Happy Easter Sunday. If you are enjoying the content on this channel and you enjoyed this live stream, please do like, comment and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot, and I hope to have you back here and join me for the next Sunday live stream. And perhaps we'll keep working on the topics like that I put into a poll both here on YouTube and on my Instagram, asking you music producers, what do you find the most challenging? And today sound design was a choice because it was one of the most popular things that people asked to sort of learn about. So I hope you find this useful and it will help you with your music, and you can start making the music ideas you want to make. If you've got any comments about that poll or things that you struggle with or find challenging, drop them in the comments and I will read those, and I will consider that for the next video that I do, the next live stream. So thank you again. Take care. Have a fantastic rest of your Easter, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao for now. Bye bye. Ciao.